The House of Representatives has just made history in a way that no American in any generation has ever witnessed before. And Frontline America is bringing you the full picture of what this extraordinary moment truly means for the constitutional order of the United States. Tonight, the House voted to impeach President Donald Trump for a third time, a development so historically unprecedented that it demands serious examination not just of what happened inside that chamber, but of what it reveals about the deepening conflict between this presidency and the foundational principles upon which American democracy was built. The vote was 230 yeas to 197 nays, with one member voting present. And with that recorded vote, Article 1 was adopted, followed by a vote on Article 2, marking the third separate occasion in American history on which a sitting president has been impeached by the House of Representatives, and the first time any president has ever faced impeachment 3 times, a record that no framers of the Constitution could have imagined when they designed the impeachment process as a safeguard against executive overreach. The central charge at the heart of this impeachment cuts straight to one of the Constitution's most fundamental questions, which is the question of who holds the power to take this country to war. And the answer that 230 members of Congress gave tonight is unambiguous. That power does not belong to a man sitting in the Oval Office who acts as though he answers to nobody. What brought the House to this dramatic late-night session was a decision by President Trump to order a series of unilateral military strikes against Venezuela. Offensive military operations against a sovereign nation that were launched without seeking congressional approval, without meaningful consultation with the legislative branch, and without any of the constitutional procedures that have governed American military actions since the very founding of this republic. This was not a situation involving an imminent threat that required split-second decision-making. There was no emergency that prevented the president from picking up the phone and consulting with congressional leadership. He had ample time to engage with lawmakers, and he chose not to do so. He simply decided that he did not need to ask permission, and it was that decision, that deliberate and conscious bypassing of the constitutional allocation of war powers that the House of Representatives examined and concluded represented exactly the kind of executive overreach that the Constitution was specifically designed to prevent. The framers of the Constitution allocated war powers to Congress for a very deliberate reason, rooted in hard historical experience. They had lived under a monarchy, where a king could commit an entire nation to military adventures without consulting anyone. And they designed the American system of government specifically to ensure that no single executive could do the same thing in the republic they were creating. Under the Constitution, Congress declares war. Congress authorizes military action, and the president commands the military only after Congress has made the decision to engage. When a president launches offensive strikes without that authorization, he is not simply making a policy choice that reasonable people might disagree about. He is violating the structural allocation of power that the Constitution itself establishes. And a structural violation of that magnitude is precisely the kind of conduct that impeachment was designed to address. The response from President Trump came immediately, and with the volcanic fury that has become characteristic of how he processes accountability. Even as the votes were being cast in Washington, Trump was standing at a rally in Battle Creek, Michigan, telling his crowd that it does not really feel like they are being impeached, that the country is doing better than ever, and that they did nothing wrong. He erupted on his social media platform with a torrent of posts that escalated in intensity as the night wore on, and the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. He told his followers that his political opponents were declaring open war on American democracy, that they were the ones interfering in America's elections, that they were subverting democracy, obstructing justice, and bringing pain and suffering to the republic. He called the impeachment a coup, deploying the most incendiary language available to characterize what was in fact a legitimate constitutional process carried out by elected members of Congress fulfilling their constitutional obligations. He called it treason, accusing the very members of Congress who voted to hold him accountable of betraying the country rather than exercising their constitutional duty. He called it election interference, reframing a congressional impeachment vote as an attack on democratic processes rather than what it actually was, which is an exercise of them. At that same rally in Michigan, he went after individual members of Congress in deeply personal terms. He insulted the physical appearance of Congressman Adam Schiff. He went after James Comey. He imagined a fictional conversation between Bill and Hillary Clinton. And in one of the most striking moments of the evening, he made deeply callous remarks about the late Congressman John Dingell, the longest-serving member of the House of Representatives in American history, a beloved figure from Michigan who had served his country through decades of both Democratic and Republican administrations, and who had passed away earlier in the year. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who succeeded her husband in that seat, had previously called President Trump to thank him for the honors the administration provided during the congressman's funeral, the flying of flags at half-staff, and the other ceremonial courtesies that any White House would extend to a figure of John Dingell's stature and service. Trump described that phone call at the rally and then suggested, to the delight of his crowd, that perhaps John Dingell was looking up rather than down, a remark widely understood as suggesting the late congressman might be in hell. Commentators watching the rally described the moment as a stunning display of indecency toward a woman who is still mourning the loss of her husband and toward the memory of a man who served in World War II, is buried at Arlington National Cemetery, and devoted his life to public service that spanned generations and earned respect from members of both political parties. What made the moment even more striking was where it was happening, which was in Michigan, John Dingell's home state, where he was deeply beloved. The crowd reaction said everything about the dynamics of the evening. When Trump initially made the remarks, the crowd did not fully respond. And then he pushed further below the belt, and then they reacted. The split screen between the solemn constitutional proceedings in Washington and this rally performance in Michigan said everything that needed to be said about how this president processes accountability and how he relates to the institutional gravity of the moment he was living through. He was performing for an audience that was never inside that chamber, treating a historic constitutional reckoning as raw material for a rally performance designed to keep his base energized and loyal. Think carefully about what it means for a president to be impeached 3 times. No other president in American history has faced impeachment more than once. Andrew Johnson faced a single impeachment and survived removal by a single vote in the Senate. Bill Clinton faced a single impeachment and was acquitted. Donald Trump has now faced 3 separate impeachment votes in the House of Representatives, 3 separate occasions on which the chamber constitutionally charged with initiating impeachment proceedings has looked at his conduct and concluded that it met the constitutional threshold of high crimes and misdemeanors. This is not a statistical anomaly or a quirk of political timing. This is a pattern. And that pattern reflects something fundamental about the relationship between this particular president and the constitutional constraints on executive power. The accumulation of 3 impeachments now establishes a permanent historical record that will define his legacy regardless of what happens in any Senate trial, regardless of whether any of these impeachments result in removal, and regardless of how effectively his supporters dismiss each individual proceeding as partisan theater. The permanent institutional documentation of 3 separate congressional determinations that he committed impeachable offenses is now part of the American constitutional record forever and cannot be erased. The momentum behind this 3rd impeachment did not materialize out of nowhere. Representative Al Green and other Democrats had been forcing surprise impeachment-related votes for months, using procedural mechanisms to gauge support within the caucus and keep the issue alive even when House leadership preferred a more cautious approach. Those procedural moves revealed a level of support that startled even the organizers, with roughly 140 lawmakers already prepared to advance impeachment long before leadership gave the official green light. That number demonstrated clearly that this impeachment was not being driven by a small fringe of the Democratic caucus, but represented a broad and deep conviction among a substantial portion of the House that the president had crossed a constitutional line that simply could not be ignored. The political dynamics surrounding this third impeachment are also significantly different from those surrounding the previous two, and those differences tell an important story about how Trump's political position has genuinely weakened over time. His approval rating is lower now than it was during either of his prior impeachments, meaning fewer Americans are reflexively defending him, and more are open to the argument that his conduct warrants constitutional accountability. His grip on the Republican caucus has visibly loosened, with members who previously defended him through every scandal now showing signs of independence that would have been completely unthinkable during the earlier years of his political dominance. Reports indicate that Trump privately warned Republicans that if they break with him on this impeachment, he will destroy them politically. Language that is characteristically absolute and aggressive, and designed to inspire the kind of fear that kept Republicans in line through previous scandals. But the response from some Republicans this time has been notably different, with members beginning to treat those threats as increasingly empty, as the bluster of a political figure whose ability to make good on threats of political destruction has been diminished by his own accumulating troubles, multiple impeachments, multiple criminal indictments, and a sustained erosion of the broad coalition he once commanded. A threat only works if the person receiving it believes the threatener has the power to carry it out. And when that belief erodes, the threat becomes noise. The coup language that Trump deployed throughout this evening deserves careful attention because it is not merely rhetorical excess. It is a substantive claim that the people carrying out the impeachment are acting illegitimately, that they are attempting to seize power rather than exercise their constitutional responsibilities, and that the process itself is corrupt and should be resisted rather than respected. This kind of rhetoric does not simply defend against specific charges. It attacks the very legitimacy of the constitutional framework that makes impeachment possible in the first place. And when a president accuses members of Congress of committing treason by voting to hold him accountable, he is suggesting they are enemies of the country, whose actions constitute a betrayal of the nation, rather than a fulfillment of their sworn constitutional duties. This is the language of political warfare, and it contributes to an environment in which political opponents are seen not as legitimate adversaries to be debated and challenged through democratic processes, but as existential threats to be eliminated. Frontline America will continue to cover every development in this story as it unfolds, because what happens next in the Senate will determine whether the constitutional accountability that the House has now initiated 3 separate times will ever be completed. And the answer to that question will tell the American people something profound about the durability of the institutional constraints that the framers built into this republic to prevent any single person from placing himself above the law.